Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors could talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. You can find us here at ltveh.org. Just look for video on demand and search The Writer's Dream, and you can see the show here. We are also on YouTube. You will have to search my name, my full name, Linda Maria Frank. I am the author of Annie Tillery Mysteries. And click on my picture and it will take you to all of the videos. We have interviewed here about 150 guests at this point. And if you are a reader or a writer and you're interested in finding some good books from local Long Island authors, or you're interested in getting into the writing field or are already there and need some hints about publishing and marketing, this is the place to come. We have a Facebook page. Guess what? It's called The Writer's Dream, and you can find us there as well. Today's guest is William John Rostron, and he has written a book that I have found absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
Band on the Wind, and also Sound of Redemption and Brotherhood of Forever. Are these a series? Are they based one on the other?
The first book can be...
Tell me about that.
Actually, the first and second books were written as one book. The process was amazing. I put off writing it so long, and then I suffered an illness in 2010, started writing.
Me too.
With a lot of free time. With a lot of free time, and part of my rehab was to do a lot of walking, and I did it with my iPod in my ears, and I would hear a song, and I would write down. In my mind, it would add a plot. I had a beginning, I had an end. It would add a plot twist to the story. So what I did was I would go home, and not being able to do much more than do my morning walk, I would type up 2-3 pages. And it was just, did not fit any place in particular. Right. But it was tied to the song I heard. So it was titled with that song. When I finally put it all together, the book is written as a journal by a person who was writing it in 1990, looking back into 1967. And he entitles every one of his journal entries with a song. He believes that through his whole life there's this imaginary person called the music doctor who inspires him to come up with this title. And he, in times, talks to the music doctor like it's a real person, even though he knows it isn't.
I have an imaginary friend, too. Sorry.
So
proceed.
We're not supposed to admit that, though.
What are they going to do, lock me up?
So the music doctor, he thinks, inspires him to write, give him a title for what he's going to write about. So I took each of these 2-page things, and then when I was done, and I always had the beginning, the end, and the very middle of the book, I started to put them all together. And it did create a linear plot that made sense. But they were all written as separate files. So when I pasted them, I made it one book. It was 250,000 words. It was just enormous. And I gave it to a few friends who really enjoyed it, but they liked the detail that I was told there's just too much of it for a commercial novel. And an editor looked at it and said, this is really 2 books. If you cut it right here, the first book stands on its own. It's over, it's done. And then the second book continues along that line with some of the same characters and so on. But they were written as one.
But that's a marketing bonanza to have 2 books, you know, because the first thing they ask you when they publish the first book is, are you writing a second book? You know, and then when you publish that one, it's there, are you writing another one? You know, it's if they like your books, and that it's a compliment in a way, but it's a lot of pressure. But that really started out. You've done a whole bunch of other things. I see that you won an award from Nelson DeMille.
Yes.
I mean, Nelson DeMille is like so big here on Long Island and everywhere else for a short story historical fiction, The Last Artifact.
It's probably the only fiction I wrote until I retired. My writing came from two different directions. I wrote nonfiction and I wrote fiction. My fiction, however, was when I was teaching and I came across stories that I didn't think were interesting to students. I would write up my own 4 or 5 page stories, print them up, read them, give them a list of questions, never telling them that I had written them, and they still don't know unless they're watching this. They still don't know that I wrote them. But they were aimed at exactly what I wanted to say. But that was the only fiction I ever did. And then I took one of them that I particularly liked, and I entered a contest, which was Newsday's historical fiction. And I was one of the honorable mentions, and they brought us into Hofstra University, and Nelson DeMille gave me a certificate and everything. But most of my life I was writing nonfiction, having to do with education and politics. Because
What did you teach? Social studies?
I taught elementary school, middle school, high school, and college. When I taught middle school, high school, and college, it was history.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Excellent. American?
World Civilization 1 and 2 in college.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I always liked that.
Yeah, I loved, that was my favorite subject in school, social study, history and geography. But I ended up teaching science because I had to know how everything worked. And that's how I made the choice. But I still am really very, very, very interested in history. So you've also made it into the theater.
Yes. And actually, I owe a debt of gratitude to an organization called Visible Ink. I had been working on the first book, and I received information about this Visible Ink, which is an organization run by Memorial Sloan Kettering. And they accept writers. First of all, they give you a mentor to help you with your writing. And they say, but you have to write something under 800 words, which is very hard for me.
Yeah.
I write a list out and it's 1,000 words. But so I submitted, with the help of my mentor, and the biggest thing was what I wrote was 1,300 words, and she helped me get it down to 800, and I submitted it. And out of the 500 that they get, they take about 80 and they put them in an anthology. And then they take 12 of these and they put them on stage with actors from Broadway and the theater and movies. And they read what you wrote, but then they also act it out in the same thing. And this was put on stage at the Danny Kaye Theater.
I want you, when we're done with this interview, to give me the information for that, because I think I have some people who'd be really interested in it, guests on the show.
Yes, in fact, you can look it up under Visible Ink. But there's lots of Visible Ink that are just writing things. This one would be under Memorial Sloan Kettering.
Okay. So I wanted really to showcase the many things that you've done, but I want to go back to Band in the Wind, because when I picked it up and I started reading it, I said, this is amazing, because I don't know whether it is people of our generation that are so much of our lives revolve around the music of the times. And I personally, but that's probably because it was my youth, personally think that the music of the 60s and the 70s was absolutely the best ever to come out.
I believe that too, but I believe that if I look at my children, they like the music of the 80s, and I think it is when you're in your formative years, the music isn't just music, it's memories.
Yeah.
And that's what sort of this book is based on. I won't say it, my style of writing is, I call it realistic fiction or memoir fiction. I take real things that happen and then say, what if this had happened differently, and what if these other peripheral actions happened? And the book actually started with a very specific event in my life, which I don't want to give too much away because it's a turning point in the book. But the book starts, the person who's telling the story has been missing 23 years, and his journal is found on a beach, and the first entry says, just like the song The Summer of '69, It was the best years of my life. But in my band, Jimmy didn't quit and Joey didn't get married. They died. In fact, the whole band died except for me,
Yeah.
and I've never told the
Well,
story.
that's basically your main character
Yes,
who's writing
Johnny
this
Sip.
is a survivor of the kind of drug and alcohol scene that was rock and roll during the 60s and the, I mean, I love to see the Crosby, Stills and Nash and have Crosby talk about his liver transplant.
How did he get that?
Well, yeah, because
He was Crosby.
Unbelievable. But the music was just, I mean, I can hear one of those songs and I know exactly what I was doing, where I was, what I was teaching, who I was with. Yeah.
And that's the part of it is I have gotten a lot of feedback on the books, and it's interesting because I get feedback from different people and they like different parts of it. Musicians, especially those who remember songs of the 60s and 70s, absolutely love it. People who grew up and were raised in New York City, Queens, of a certain, they love the culture and the memories of that. And then some people just like the plot. I mean, I've gotten some reports from Amazon that I've had books sold in Australia, the United Kingdom, and Canada. I don't even know how they found out about it. Probably online.
But also the music that came out of Australia, the Bee Gees, and Britain certainly, and Canada. I mean, it was all part of a whole, I think, at the time. But I think the construct of the book is so interesting, just the way you did it. You want to just explain it a little, without giving anything away.
Okay.
But I mean,
it is a group of 5 young men who find themselves in this neighborhood in Queens, Cambria Heights, which is where I was born and raised. The area is in the largest turmoil. It was during the 60s, and it was a time of racial conflict.
yes, yeah.
And interesting, I wrote the first chapter. The book alternates between being told by the journal entries of Johnny Sip and then a third person, omniscient person who is explaining things that Johnny couldn't know. And as Johnny's telling the story, he's talking about that the neighborhood, his parents talk about it becoming bad, but he doesn't know what bad means. Looking back at it 23 years later, he goes, are they talking about racism? Are they talking about drugs? Are they talking about violence? Because I saw all those things, but my parents just said it's getting bad and people are moving out. Well, I went back and researched it. And that particular neighborhood, which I was born and raised in, 90% of the population moved between 1964 and 1970.
Yeah, I remember that.
And at the time, my parents said, we're not moving, we're not like that. And it wasn't until I was in college and they decided to move out where my sister lived out in Suffolk County. But I lived right in the center geographically of where things were happening. And so there's a lot of issues in there of racial conflict, which I witnessed with really bad people on both sides. And I saw it, and I could even tell you some of their names, which I changed.
Good. To protect yourself.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, what was the most challenging thing about writing this book, these books?
Actually, the most challenging part was the editing after, because I put it all together and it was so long. To me, every single word fit, and it did fit. It's just I went through minuscule description of things that I thought some people would like, and believe it or not, some people liked it. But they said I like books like Mitch had books that were 1,200 pages.
Yeah.
I remember reading Centennial, where he started the book with when the dinosaurs were in Colorado.
He always did that. Yeah.
And I don't know what I was thinking, but I was almost doing that. I mean, I went through little details of when the band that's the main characters, how they chose what they were wearing when they performed in Central Park. And I actually lived that because we did perform in Central Park. And I remember us deciding, well, do we all dress alike like the Beatles or do we dress differently like the Rolling Stones? I said, people said, but you went on for 4 pages about that. Most people really don't care. So I had a lot of people, my wife, my daughter, friends, who told me where I could cut with the least amount of, but that was the hardest part. It was not the writing, because that was happening in 2 or 3 page intervals.
Well, it's killing all those words
you love. It was killing it, because every time I killed it, I killed one of the songs, which was a memory.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's, I think we as writers fall in love with our words.
Right.
And what do you mean I have to get rid of that paragraph?
I mean, my daughter read it the first time now. Now she's in her 30s, and she said, "You got to cut out about 60,000 words." And I went, "No, I'm not cutting a word." She goes, "You think you're done with this book? You're just starting." And I went, "Oh, okay." And then she cut them. She said, "You could cut this. You could cut that. You could cut this."
Yeah, well, that's why you need an editor. You always have to have an editor.
I called her, instead of editor, she was my conscience.
Okay. What was the best part of writing this?
The best part was, as again, parts of the book are true, and parts of it are totally made up. And when I wrote the true parts, it was like I was reliving them again. And it was
the zone.
Yeah, and but interesting what it's based on, and why it was in my head for 40 years was, we had this band, and we were using it as our escape, and it didn't happen because a certain major event happened, and I never saw the other 4 band members ever again, and I wouldn't say any more about that. So in my head, I kept saying, "Gee, wonder whatever happened to them." And my imagination went wild. For 30 years, I said, "Well, what could have happened to them?" Now, if you read the book, there's a good reason to believe that and that did happen. There was mafia connections and things like that. But in my mind, I said, "What happened?" And it wasn't until like 1999 I finally found one of them, and he told me, he goes, "Yeah, that's what happened to me. I don't know. We still don't know what happened to the other 3."
Wow.
And that's the true part of the story. So my imagination was, and then when you get to that part of the book, everything was, I just made up what happened to them.
Well, also the music industry at that time was connected to the mob.
Yes.
And were controlled because they wanted their little piece of the action.
Right.
And so
I won't say what happened, but they...
Yeah, but I think people did just disappear because they
Right.
knew that if they didn't disappear, it would be their life.
It's a story of... it was interesting because when people say, "Well, what's your book about?" And you're supposed to define it into a little piece, and I said, I really can't find a genre because, and actually in the cover of this book, the second book, they said, "What's it a story of?" And I said, I actually wrote a little paragraph that said, "I can't tell you what it's about. I would just tell you it's a story of music and memories and maniacs and murder, loyalty and love and loathing and lying, racism and revenge, rock and roll and redemption."
Great. That's
and
great.
That was the only way I could describe it, because the plot takes so many twists, so many people are involved in it.
It's life, right?
Yeah.
To quote the Irishman, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Okay. I'm going to read a review.
Okay.
Do you mind?
Fine.
Okay. This tale told by Rostron succeeds massively. It is a story told with dollops of nitty and gritty, but also some blasts and burns that will thrill you as powerfully as, well, as a power chord. A giant power chord amped up with emotions, friendship, cruelty, hate, revenge, and love. Real love for the music and the muses that make the music what it is. Rock music and the role it plays in the lives of a cast of oh-so-real characters, and a storyteller that has me gasping for an encore. This is a novel that soundtracks the life and lives of what it meant to be in the band for life and death. So there you go. Yeah, I don't know whether it's over-dramatizing it, but I really felt like rock and roll was such a big part of my life, and I didn't play any musical instruments. My mother said to me when I was like 8 years old, she said, "You really don't want to learn how to play the piano, do you?" So that was the end of my musical career. But it just It was the background. I don't know if other generations really feel that way. The big band era, did they feel that way? None of them are left, so you can't ask them. You have to have a seance.
I know that every generation loves its music because it is their youth that they're listening to. And I'm always amazed that my 3 children listen to some of the same music I do. I go, but this is half a century ago.
Yeah.
And my children are in their early 40s and late 30s, and they listen to Billy Joel and
the Beatles.
Yeah, and my daughter had a short play put on off-Broadway, and in it, she has a scene where they do Walk Like a Man by the... I said, how do you know that? By the Four Seasons. How do you know Walk Like a Man?
Yeah.
She says, oh, I know it.
Yeah. And so much of it comes up in the commercials now.
Right.
So so whatever. So let's get to the nitty-gritty of, because the book, I think, sells itself. The idea of the book, I think, is very...
Actually, that's an interesting point, because the idea of the book didn't sell itself. I tried to get an agent, and I gave them the idea of the book, as you just said. They never read a word of what I wrote and just said, we don't like the idea. And I said, you don't like the idea? Can you try it?
These people are so difficult. I had one say, I didn't really read your book, but... What? Then don't tell me what but is if you didn't really read it.
They basically said, we didn't like the concept. I said, well, okay, sorry that I
to me, the concept
I didn't
is...
get you. I said, but...
I should have been an agent.
Yeah, you didn't like the concept. I said, it seems like every book that was coming out is the same concept today, you know, and I read a lot of them, you know, some of the crime thrillers and the suspense and everything. I said, I thought this was very different. And,
it is different.
And maybe you'd like to try it, because, I mean, I have found that, well, my theory is that of all the people I know, very few people read, which bothers me, because I was a teacher and I taught reading for so many years. They don't read. They look at their phones, but they don't read. And those that read, a lot of them are baby boomers. But that's not who they gear the books at.
No.
I've already done, well, next Monday I'll be doing my 3rd book club. And it's all people 50 to 70 years old. And they really, they go, you know, we like the music, it's the culture, it's the times, it's our thoughts, it's our lives. And I said, but meanwhile, I have had some reviews, and I have them over there, that I submitted the book to something called the Online Book Club. And they're all different ages, and they like a different aspect of the action and so on. And so again, I get people who like it for the nostalgia, some people who like it for the music, and some people like it for the plot line and what happens to the characters. The concept that it's a flashback.
Well, it's different people read books for different reasons. Yes. And I would think that this book would have great appeal for young people, simply because young people are really tied into their music.
Yes.
And a lot of them are tied into the fact that the music that they enjoy really evolved from the music that we enjoy.
Right.
Which, I'm older than you, so I mean, my first music was early rock and roll, 50s rock and roll. So, and that, of course, was the basis for everything that came after it.
Which I knew because I have an older sister who listened to it all.
The Beatles admit freely that they were very heavily influenced by Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley and all the way down the line. So is your book as successful as you'd like it to be?
Probably not. Because does anybody ever think that it's successful as they want it to be?
Have they made the movie yet?
It's funny, because the first 10 or so friends that I tried it on, they're going, that's not a movie, it's a mini-series. Which I could picture.
All right, yeah.
You want to film it here?
Me too. I always want my books to be, because mine is a series. I would love to have somebody pick it up.
I mean, the trouble is, I've had a lot of trouble marketing it, because I've had some physical problems. As I was telling you before we started, just the day it came out, I had a physical problem that lasted through the summer. So to be out there with it I'm just starting to be able to do that. I did a show like this just before Thanksgiving and this, and then, you know.
You can mention it, Stephanie Larkin.
Okay.
She was
Stephanie,
here.
hi,
She was here, actually.
Yes. Which, you know, and, you know, I do that show, and all of a sudden I see book sales pick up and so on. It's hard because I want to spend my time writing. I don't want to spend my time pushing what I write.
Yeah, well, this is my issue too. I mean, I'm involved in planning book events and doing the TV show, and then I have a lecture series. And by the time I have the time to sit down and write, I fall asleep. But that's my age. So you have about a minute left.
Okay.
If you were able to give somebody who came to you who's going to write a book and you like their idea, what advice would you give them?
You have to really like what you're writing and commit to it. Because to be honest, while I was working and had 3 kids, and my wife and I were running around with them and everything, I found I only could write short things to do justice to them because I didn't have the attention span. So you've got to write in little pieces. You know, the cliche is just do it, but that's not real. If you
No, it isn't.
If
you have a life,
if you have a really busy life.
Yeah.
So if I was doing it all over and I wanted to write a novel, do it in little pieces, like do 2 or 3 pages. Because if you sit down, and you have to do it when you feel like it. Like I even do that now. I said, well, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write now. I go.
That's the advice I give. I say write 1 chapter and then worry about the next chapter.
I've sat there and I said, oh, I really have to write this now. And I sit down and nothing comes.
It's been great, Bill.
My pleasure.